Hello, and welcome to another episode of Extras of the Americas, a video series that brings together thought leaders from countries and industries across our hemisphere for short, in-depth conversations on the most pressing issues of our time. My name is Wazin Maula, fellow and lead of the Caribbean Initiative here at the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America Center. Today's conversation will focus on the exciting developments taking place in Suriname. On May 25th, the country held its general elections, and at the time of this recording, there's yet to be an announcement on who will hold the presidency. At the same time, Suriname is emerging as the world's next oil and gas hub, with foreign investment starting to flow and the development agenda taking shape. The next 5 years for Suriname will see transformational development for the country and for its people. This is why I'm delighted to be joined today by the president of the American Chamber of Commerce of Suriname, Anushka Sonai. Anushka, great to see you again, and thank you for joining us. Anushka is one of Suriname's industry leaders and is a recognized voice among the private sector. She's the founder and president of Creative Tech Hub Caribbean, which focuses on developing the region's creative technology ecosystem. Anushka has been a strong advocate for young people and women in the Caribbean, having spearheaded 2 different scholarship initiatives and focused on greater digital inclusion. Anushka, once again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wazim. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here and share some of the information that I have.
Yeah, well, we're pleased to have you, especially at such an important time. Elections not too long ago, things still up in the air. So I guess my first question to you has to be, can you share a little bit about what happened in the election? Where do things stand today?
Of course, yes. So Suriname has a democracy, and we don't vote for our president. We vote for our parliament's members. So what happens is that there are 51 candidates for the parliament, and they campaign. They belong to parties, and well, the several political parties, they present their agendas and how they think that the country should be led. And based on that, and also the propaganda, and also who knows who, people make their choice in who they vote for, of course. And what happened last Sunday is that the majority of Suriname voted. It's the majority because out of the elections, the the people who are eligible to vote, that is 339,000 people in Suriname. 65% approximately went to the voting stations and they casted their vote. The 65% is the lowest we had for the last 4 elections, if I recall. Because we were always above 70%. And you can see that in some of the districts, we've gotten the 70%, but in the capital city, it was low. So we had 65% of people who showed up. And one interesting fact is this was the first time in history for Suriname that it was one vote, one person, one vote, which could further contribute towards getting a seat. While before we had an election system where a seat in, for instance, the capital in Paramaribo would require you to have 6,000 votes before you got one seat. While in another district, you could have, like Karoni, you could have 2,000 votes, so 2,000 people for a seat. So those were named the cheaper seats for parliament. And that has changed. So for the first time, and that's what makes it interesting for most of us as well, because we didn't know what to expect and how this all would translate into election results. And what we see is that there is a big a group of people. It's almost 50-50, but it's not yet 50-50. I think it's more of 45 to 55% of people have chosen for the 2 biggest parties. While we expected that more people would vote for the smaller parties, in the previous system that we had, it was difficult for small parties to gain a seat. So we expected that by changing the system, we would get these smaller parties, we would give them a bigger chance so they could also get seats. But it did not translate in too many seats for the smaller parties. It's just fixed for NPS, which was Well, during the pollings, we thought they would get 10 seats, but they only got six. And we have the ABOP with six, and the others have either one or two. There are two with one seat and two with two seats. So that's something that we're learning about. It's new for Suriname. And it's also the first elections without Bouterse, ex-president, His Excellency Daisy Delano Bouterse. It's the first time that he is not here with us anymore. So it was also interesting to see how the impact of him not being there would influence the NDP. It was also the first time after a heavy reform program by the VHP that we had this election. And we got 18 seats for NDP and 17 seats for VHP, which is the VHP, the Orange Party. They got 17 seats, and they are the two largest parties. So everyone is looking at them in how either of them will be able to secure uh, a coalition to work with.
Thank you, Anushka, for that overview. What it seems like is based on changing the electoral system, the loss of a former leader, you know, lower voter turnout than expected it really is a I would say an inflection point for Suriname and its political system. And that kind of takes me to my next question, which is, you know, we're still waiting to see who will hold the presidency in Suriname, but how might this general election shape the future of the country, at least over the next 5 years?
Well, it's like I said, it's so divided that it's a little bit difficult to say. But if you look at three or four of the big things like economic policy, social development, foreign relationships, and governance, um, if the NDP secures a government, it will be different than if the VHP secures the government. And because they have the most seats, I'd like to answer this question by naming some of the biggest differences between these two parties. While the NDP is known for a party that has a lot of, let's say, populist spending. So they do big spendings and they have a lot of infrastructure programs alongside societal growth and well-being of the people. And that's also how they profile themselves during this election is we are for the poor people. What we see with the VHP is not just because they entered in power while we were going through the COVID pandemic. It was 2020, so COVID was at its highest, but also because of the bigger inflation that we had and the economic situation that was in the country. They did some strict reforms, but they are known for the party of being in favor of what we call in English austerity measures. And, you know, while austerity measures are necessary, it makes you less popular with the people because while we went through an IMF program, and VHP is known for having the courage to do these reforms because I think in 2016 and 2018, the NDP already knew that we needed to do some reforms. But they said, we don't want to do this because it will cost the people of the Suriname a lot. Like we will go through a lot of pain if they do that. And VHP instead, like on the president's in Turkey, they said, let's take that but reform our economy. And then, you know, we have a better starting point to build from there. So they restored fiscal discipline and they are known for it. So if you put the NDP next to the VHP, it's more of the restoring of fiscal discipline, restructuring debt, but also the cuts in fuel subsidy, electricity, and all. And while these things are necessary, it's still provoked public anger against them because we are already in a difficult situation and you're doing all these reforms and it's too much and we cannot. And I think that's why most people voted against that type of leadership and that type of economic reform. So, yeah, I think for the future of the country, we now have a good, let's say, a stable economy because our international reserve, which was zero in 2020, it is now 1 billion US dollars. We have reformed our debt. Our inflation went from, well, internationally they say 75%, but locally the data is 68%. So let's say it's between 65 and 70%. We went to from 65% to 5.6% of inflation, which is really great because that's interesting for investors because investors they don't look at who will win the elections. They look at whether or not there is stability, there is clarity, and there is follow through on these fiscal and institutional reforms. Because you don't want to make a big investment in a country where you know that the economy will, triple down. So the next administration should double down on infrastructure, local capacity buildings, sector diversifications, and things like that.
Thank you. It's really interesting that there are two still possible tracks that the country can go down. On one hand, bigger spending, different geopolitical partners, infrastructure programs, etc. And then on the other hand is, I guess, more discipline writ large in the both economy and politics, etc. And it seems that approach has bared some fruit with there being significantly lower inflation. I think the statistic about the 1 billion in reserves now over a 5-year period is extremely impressive. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens over the next couple of weeks, but definitely over the next couple of years. But either way, as you mentioned, the economy is much more stable relative to 2020. And that kind of takes me to think about, Suriname also has this abundance of oil and natural gas, which I would imagine will just help accelerate and catapult the economy even more so than it has over the past 5 years. So maybe want to get some of your thoughts, right, on what does the outlook look like for Suriname's newfound oil and gas resources, and what are some projects that are coming online that we should look out for over the next few years.
Yes. So with the oil and gas, I want to elaborate a little bit because you mentioned we have a lot of oil. We also have a lot of gold, copper, lithium, sand, sorry, mortar, which is really good for exports to Guyana, as Guyana is doing a lot of infrastructure development, so they need sand, they need stones, everything. And while they have it, it's, I think, much more complex to get it from their side than from getting it from Suriname, So I think also looking at those natural resources alongside oil and gas. Um, what we should really see that in 2028, we expect the first oil from the Total Energies and APA Corporation partnership project. They are doing a $10 billion investment in Suriname currently. The FPSO is built by SBM in China, so that will be coming to Suriname. And in 2028, we will get that. But there are more offshore discoveries that have positioned Suriname as this emerging player, and we expect Petronas and also Chevron and Qatar Energy. So Petronas is already exploring. So are Chevron and Qatar Energies who are in a partnership. But we expect they will start in August. So Chevron will start in August with some more in-depth explorations. And alongside them, we have other discoveries, which we expect that the next FDI will be in August or October. So somewhere between August and October, the next FDI for Suriname will be announced if things are still, uh, going well, which I honestly think will happen. I think that Whether or not FEHAPE or NDP forms the government, in general, any government for Suriname knows that Suriname is now maturing as a strategic partner for most of the countries. And while previously the NDP was known for a more, let's say, for another geopolitics decision that was also driven by the fact that we had Bouterse as the leader, but now we have Mrs. Jennifer Simons as the leader, and she has a different perspective. She is also somewhat more, let's say, approachable for or new ideas, probably. So it may help for her that she knows that the public-private diplomacy has to, align with how the development goals are structured. And yeah, that will be something that we will expect from our government, and we as AmCham will surely lobby and have the advocacy for looking more at the US side of doing business with the US and bringing in that global knowledge to help us with economic reinvestments in all of these areas, which are really important for Suriname to make her step for development.
No, thank you. I like what you said, especially at the outset. It's not just the oil and gas, but it's the entire extractive industries, which goes a little bit to your point earlier when you were giving some recommendations on sector diversification. And given where Suriname is at the tip of South America, near both Caribbean islands, but also countries in South America, it really can be, especially with a country like Guyana next to it, a strategic vantage point for partners like the US and the EU and Canada, et cetera. And I think that's really it makes it really exciting to learn about what's happening in Suriname and see where the country is going to go and progress, especially hearing about so many big companies that are already looking to get involved. And you guys had a project that reached FID last year. You have one that might reach one this year. So that pace of the development is certainly exploding. You talked a little bit about AmCham. And you do a great role as president of AmCham, and I've gotten recently to see firsthand some of the cool things that you've been doing. And I want to talk a little bit about the private sector because in Guyana we have this challenge as well in private sector capacity. But I would like to get your thoughts on in Suriname, what role will Suriname's local private sector need to play to support overall development? And then on the other side of it is, they're playing a role, but how can other partners help them? What support do they need themselves in order to be able to be a contributing factor to development?
I think this is a great question for this moment, especially as we're going through a lot of changes happening. And well, for instance, AmCham is working closely with the US Embassy, who's bringing in at the Suriname Energy Oil and Gas Conference. AmCham will have a booth, a presence where we will advocate for our members and like give them a platform where they can be in our exhibition booth and share their let's say products and services. They can meet potential new investors or partners. But I think the critical role for the private sector is now in the fact that we should be um, driving implementation and not just participating and not just advocating for reform or for let's say development of private sector. While we usually take the lead in advocating for what are the pain points, how can the government better facilitate us, what are the things that investors are looking for, and advocating that to our government and say this is what you need to work on for investors to think, oh wow, Suriname is a great place to invest. We should also play a more active role in the development of the nation, because what we see is that every 5 years the government change. So let's have the private sector drive the implementation while where local businesses can translate national projects into jobs and innovation here locally. And they need access, because you ask, what do they need? They need access to financing, which sounds cliche, But most of the international financing, and we spoke about this while earlier, Wazim, while international projects usually come at a very large scale, which is too large for our economies. So the requirements and regulations are also too strict for us to comply with. We should make that financing accessible. We need skills development, but also sector development. Because what we sometimes do is we train people in everything and anything, and we think, okay, this is what they will need. But then the ecosystem is not so well developed for them to do business. And when I say ecosystem, it's the policies, it's the market also. Let's develop that market. And if someone is, for instance, in the agricultural sector and they are, let's say, having a good production, the export needs to be facilitated, and the private sector should not just tell the government, hey, you're not working on this, and work on it, but this is how you can work on it, and we will do step one, two, three, because the shipping agencies are our private sector. So we can, take that first step. And AmCham is working on to build a business climate that promotes scale exports and more partnerships. And you know that we have an official MOU with AmCham Guyana, and we also have a good relationship with AmCham Trinidad. And recently, with the CBC conference, we were able to also connect with AmCham in the Dominican Republic and Jamaica. So let's see if we can make a more, let's say, cross-border uh, collaboration. And of course, what we spoke about, the de-risking of the investment for the private sector capacity, those are things that are really important for us.
No, I think that you hit all the points that are not just relevant for Suriname, but the wider Caribbean. We see these as important points for private sector. And one of the benefits I think Suriname will have is that as the market grows and more investment comes in, it gives the private sector room to really grow as well. A lot of times in small markets, there's just not enough investment or project development to kind of force private sector to scale their skills and abilities to kind of take on those projects. Suriname won't have that part, but your point is that that foundation needs to be built, whether it's sector development, skills development, access to finance. And one key thing that you really picked up on, given the moment we're in right now where the politics are what they are in Suriname, and it seems it's a little bit more politically divided than initially thought, is that it seems like the private sector can be that stable partner, right? So if you're an investor looking into Suriname, you don't have to deal only with the politics of the day, but you can have a stable long-term partner in the private sector, specifically, working with people like yourselves in AmCham Suriname. So, we're quickly running out of time, but I wanted to say, a quick thank you for taking the time to answer these questions in what is a really busy week, I would imagine. And just know that from the Atlantic Council, from the Caribbean Initiative, you have partners in us, both for you, your businesses, but also for AmCham Suriname. So we look forward to working together, and we'll definitely continue this conversation in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, but also for helping me with writing down one of the most important things that I got from here, and that is a stable long-term partner for investors, which is a better way of positioning AmCham, who is, whether or not whichever government comes, AmCham wants to be that partner for our members, but also for new companies coming in. So thank you so much for having me and for sharing your insights too.
Thank you, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.